Hope you took a nice break. I hope you stood up and stretched your legs and did some walking around. I promise we'll be done on time at the end. So I will not, I definitely will not keep you late. I promise that. We're gonna kind of quickly go through modules 4 and 5. So I will just point out that I don't want anybody to feel pressure because we're gonna go into a little more into the nuts and bolts and a little more in the weeds in some of these areas going forward. Here's something to keep in mind is that you don't have to have all the answers to all the things, right? We don't expect that by any means. So the goal is that you feel like you have at least enough information about to talk a little more knowledgeably, but also just enough information to say, let's get help. You know, let's ask somebody who does know, and that's perfectly fine. So, you know, when you're talking about banking, you're talking about loans, even the credit section, long-term planning, you can bring in an outside speaker. And I really do recommend that. You don't have to have all the information. Just as we would not want your banker training their staff on what domestic violence is, you don't need to feel like you have to have all the information on how to talk about loans and banking. So this is a great time for you. Your organization banks somewhere, right? So reach out to them. Each bank actually has to do something that's called a reinvestment score. And part of that is that they help expand access to credit in certain communities. So you can ask what they're doing for their community reinvestment acts or their CRA score. If they already have something going, then that's fine. You can still ask that bank if they would send a representative to talk to your program, your participants about things like second chance banking and how do loans work and how to improve your credit. They can co-present with you. Your organization may also offer a retirement planning assistance. You know, maybe they do like a 401k type situation. They work with a company that does that. See if the representative will come in and also talk to the survivors in your support group on module 5. So this is just a really great place to get other community members involved. Again, you don't have to have all the information. And it also is can be a unique way to get communities engaged in what you're doing. Obviously, the AllState Foundation is supporting this work. This is their curriculum. So also maybe even reaching out to an AllState agent. If that's something that is of interest to you, let me know. I have some access to agents who have kind of already raised their hand and said they would like to be involved. So you can always start the inquiry with me, or you can even just talk to an agent, a local agent. They may not know about this program, so don't be surprised if you ask an AllState agent about this curriculum and that it's news to them, and that's perfectly fine, because they have lots of other community engagement initiatives. So don't be surprised by that. Doesn't mean they still might not be happy to be involved. So let me share my screen here. We're going to get into module 4. Let's see. There we go. So we're going to talk about finances, but a lot about housing and well, some about housing, but mostly about banking and loans and how loans work essentially. So we'll go pretty quickly through this. We certainly recognize that the vast majority of the survivors you work with will never, will not in a while anyway, potentially get to a place where they want to talk about how home mortgages work or long-term planning and retirement planning. We make sure we have the information in here so folks who do get to that spot, it's available. We don't want to ever assume what somebody's journey or trajectory looks like. So it certainly is in here. And so we just encourage you to take advantage of it if it really is appropriate for folks. So upon reflection, and again, this is a great place to put into the chat or to unmute yourself if you want. How many of you have ever applied for a loan, such as a car or a home mortgage? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable are you with the loan process application, with the application process, I should say? When you go to apply for a car loan or a mortgage, how comfortable did you feel about that process? Scale of 1 to 10. 10, I got it. I could have, this doesn't give me any anxiety or angst. 1 being I broke out in hives. How comfortable are you with the loan application process? Yes, I've applied. 8 out of 10 of comfort. That makes sense. Yep. 7, got it. 7's pretty comfortable. 8, yep. 9, comfortable, fantastic. And it tends to be the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. I mean, I think the first time I bought a house, it was nerve-wracking. It was awful. It was it kept me up at night. The second time, third time, not as big of a deal, because I think you know that, you know, if you've done well and you know what to expect, you know you're going to be approved or not approved. And so it kind of removes some of that anxiety for sure. How knowledgeable do you feel about how loans work? Do you feel like you get the process and how loans work, how those decisions are made, and how comfortable do you feel negotiating terms of a loan? You know, particularly on a car loan, probably not so much on a mortgage, but on a car loan, how many people feel comfortable with that process? 7 out of 10. Yeah. Yeah. Some people love buying new cars. Some people are like, oh, it's the worst thing ever. I'd rather, you know, do anything, get a root canal than go have to deal with buying a new car. Hate it. Not comfortable at all negotiating. Oh, Victoria, I get it. I get it. I get it. Hopefully, you know, I can't help you figure out the right car, but hopefully I can help you understand a little bit more about how those decisions are made and what you can do to put yourself in the best position and the best light to possible lenders. So that's kind of the goal. So let's talk about about general financial paperwork and how to think about your finances. And the first thing that we want to talk about is keeping organized so that you can find these things when you need them at a moment's notice. I don't know how many times my kid has sent me a text saying, I need my social security card now, or I need this documentation immediately. And so it is nice to be able just to know and go grab those items. Oh, Victoria says she expects to spend a whole day there when negotiating for a better deal at a car dealership. Yep, it can be pretty exhausting, but there is sort of a confidence and a swag that comes with it when you know how you should be seen by those folks that can be kind of helpful, take that edge off a little bit, right? So when we talk about organizing your documents, kind of think of them in these 5 categories. So number 1 is your financial records. These are your bank statements, CDs, credit card agreements. So the documentation that you got when you opened your credit card, and anytime there's been a change in that credit card, like if they reduced your debt limit or they reduced your changed your interest rate, those kinds of things need to be kept. Your month to month, we'll talk about that. Receipts on money orders, loan documents, documentation related to public assistance could go in here. And then you have your legal documents section. So this is where your birth certificates, marriage license, divorce decree, social security cards, immigration paperwork, protection orders would go in your legal documents section of your folder. Property documents, so titles to deeds, rentals, lease agreements, vehicle registration, insurance, your stuff. That's where that info. If you know, how many times have a spot like where I had to go buy a new washer and you had a warranty and you're like, oh, I'll never keep track of that. This is where that would go. So when you make those, the warranty information, this is a great place for those things to go, is in this section. Health records, medical, dental, vision records, disability insurance, medical expenses, receipts from doctors, lists of doctors, living will. This is a great place for this to go in this section. And then finally, your expense documents. So these are where your household, your monthly stuff, when you get a new utility bill, this is where that would go. But what I want you to think about is, don't hang on to these monthly expenses month after month after month. Just hang on to your most recent one. When the new one comes, it all looks right. What I paid is what they show. Shred your old one. You don't need to save 10 years worth of utility bills. You just need to see your most recent one, in part because if your electricity goes out, you just pull your thing and it's got the number on, you call and it's all, you're like, I paid on this day. And that's what you should put, maybe write on. That's what I do. When I get my utility bill, I pay. And when I pay it, I make a note, paid on whatever, put it away. And then when the next month's come, all looks right, I shred the previous one. In part, you just don't need to keep that much paperwork around. You just don't. It takes up a lot of space. Shred it, get rid of it. But I also think about, I live in Kansas, and it's like Tornado Alley up here, right? And so I think about if a tornado came and blew my roof off of my house and all my paperwork's flying all over, I want to reduce the risks that are out there potentially. So you just don't need to keep it around. Shred excuse me, that month-to-month stuff. Other things like taxes, you always keep your annual taxes, those kinds of things. But your month-to-month expenses, you don't need to hang on to those ongoing. So loans. So taking out a loan, we talked about this in module 3, might actually help rebuild your credit and your financial well-being. Taking on debt isn't always bad, and it can actually help build positive credit over time. You know what I just realized? I forgot to tell you about our Independence Project. I'll do that when we get to the end of this one. I forgot a slide. It can actually help build positive credit. So however, you want to avoid out taking any new debt unless you are sure you'll be able to repay it on time. Additionally, be aware of any new line of credit can have safety implications and will again show up on your credit report. I think we talked about this even yesterday. So different types of loans to think about. There's basically two kinds of loans. I think I mentioned this in the earlier module. There's unsecured loans, and these are obtained without collateral. These are also called signature loans, meaning you just sign. You know what? When you went and bought dinner last night and put on your Visa card, didn't you sign a little receipt? When you signed a receipt for that, that's your signature loan. You signed a signature loan statement with Visa when you bought your dinner. So typically these have higher interest rates than secured loans. An example of this are things like credit card or student loans or personal loan. The reason that the interest rate is higher because there is nothing of value backing the loan. If you stop paying on it, they're just out the money. So the higher the risk to the lender, the higher the interest rate. There's an algorithm built in and baked into that, what they're lending you or loaning you at that interest rate, that so many people cannot pay their loans back and they still make money because the interest rates across the board are so high. So this is then versus a secured loan, where this is actually the loan is protected by an asset or collateral. And often that asset is actually what is being purchased. So for example, when you buy a car, the car itself is actually the collateral. Again, if you don't pay the car, they come get the car. That loan has value. However, like on a car loan, that's why your car loan interest rate is higher than a mortgage, because what you're purchasing is actually depreciating over time. It is not uncommon that when you get to year 4 or 5 of your 5-year car loan, that the value of the car is actually worth less than what you still owe on it. That's what's called being upside down in the car. So what you're buying actually depreciates over time. So the interest rates are higher because there's risks associated with that. Whereas your mortgage, hopefully what you're purchasing actually appreciates and becomes more valuable. That is why it's not unusual to have a home loan that is at 2 or 3%, and your car loan is at 6 or 7%, and your credit card interest rate is 12%. So every time the risk is higher on the debt, the higher the interest rate will go as well. So due to the collateral, the interest rates are typically lower on unsecured loans. Again, examples of this is your home mortgage or an auto loan. So things to consider when buying a car. Typically, new car loans tend to have lower interest rates, but may be harder to qualify for. I haven't heard it in the last couple of weeks that I think about, but it wasn't that long ago that you would still hear on car commercials that it would say 0% financing for well-qualified buyers. But those are only on brand new cars that they offer 0% financing. But there are things to consider that may be higher though in new cars, such as things like insurance and maintenance and tags. Licensing that car may be actually higher on a new car. But why would a new car have lower interest rates or be less risky than a used car? And that's because let's say I buy a used car that's maybe 5 years old, and I then finance it for 5 years. On year 4 of my loan, the car is actually now 9 years old, which has very little value, a 9-year-old car, and also the risks of something going wrong with a 9-year-old car and me saying, hey, I'm not messing with it, I'm not dealing with this, and walking away from the loan is much higher than in a new car. And so that is why new cars tend to have lower interest rates, because the risks and the depreciation of that are much less on that new car. Also, as a general rule, loans with shorter terms are better because you will pay less interest over the life of the loan. We'll talk about that more in the next slide. But in general, you want to have as shorter terms on that loan as you can afford on a monthly basis. You can always go to Edmunds.com to help you calculate the car loan amount you can afford. And again, don't be afraid to rate shop. Don't assume that the dealership is offering you the best deal for you. And if you have no credit, be cautious of predatory or high risk lenders. So here's an example of a $15,000 loan on a car for 3 years or 36 months. I'm going to be offered maybe 3.24%. And by the time I pay that off in 3 years, I will pay $761 in interest. But if I then finance it out for 72 months. So 3, 4, 5, 6 years, right? I can do math. 6 years, 72 months, I pay, it doesn't seem like a whole lot more, right? It's only 0.5% higher in interest rate. And look at my monthly payments so much lower. My monthly payments only gonna be $232 versus $437 on the 3-year. But look, if I project down, by the time I pay that loan off in 6 years, I will paid $1,700 in interest rates alone. I will pay geez, my words aren't coming. $1,000 more in just interest. I didn't get $1,000 better car. I just paid $1,000 more to the bank for the joy of having a 6-year relationship with them, just in interest rates. So again, you have choices in between. You can go somewhere in the middle there, but just keep in mind that the longer you stretch your loan out for, although your monthly payment will seem much more doable, you will in the lifetime of the loan pay a lot more money. So try to get it as close to, if you're like, I can't swing $437 a month, but I can do $334, and I will have reduced what I pay in interest by $700 versus $1,000. So just keep in mind, look in the long term and make sure you're doing what's best for you. So housing options. So transitional housing program might be a good option for the folks you work with. I don't know if any of you have transitional housing programs in your community. Maybe you run one as part of your organization, but transitional housing may very well be a really good option for folks once they're ready to leave shelter. The challenge, I think, with transitional housing is, the same reason we as DV advocates fought for transitional housing specific to survivors was because we had folks that were ready to leave shelter. They were no longer in crisis and they were no longer in danger, ready to move out on their own, but there was no safe, affordable housing. So we fought for transitional housing. Well, guess what? 3 years later, there's still no safe, affordable housing. So in some ways, it's really helpful because maybe people have time in that 3-year period to make more money and gain more skills and things like that, and they're better positioned. But we've really done very little to really address the problem, which is safe, affordable housing stock. And I'm sure for you guys, you probably experience this certainly where you are, that safe, affordable housing is just so hard to come by. So that continues to be a challenge and something that as advocates, we try to really work hard on the macro level. Before anyone rents, they should determine how much they can afford. Ideally, you should not be paying more than 25 to 30% of your income towards your housing. Sadly, that's not like a rule or a law, but that's what they say, that you should try not to exceed 30% of your income going towards your housing. That's actually where the Section 8 voucher amount came from. So for those of you who are not aware, Section 8 vouchers, they make privately owned rental housing affordable to low-income renters. So if you make $1,000 a month, and you qualify for a Section 8 voucher, then you only have to pay $300 a month towards your housing. But if the rental actually costs $500, that your housing 8 voucher makes up that $200 difference. We'll pay the difference. So you still only have to pay 30% of that, of your income. If you currently rent or lease with your partner, you may ask for what's called a lease bifurcation, which allows you to remove you or your partner's name from a lease. Some states have actually state laws that require landlords allow survivors of domestic violence to bifurcate the lease, again, meaning taking one name off or the other. If you are in any sort of public housing or you're managing any sort of government assisted housing, you're actually required to allow people to bifurcate a lease. So if you're working with a survivor who's in any sort of housing assistance program, they must allow for lease bifurcation. And just something to keep in mind, property damage due to domestic violence is common. And that if somebody has some property damage due to domestic violence, they can apply to crime victims compensation. However, it's important to keep in mind that most places will require some sort of law enforcement cooperation, and that you may also be able to file something against either homeowners or renters insurance. But again, they may also still require a police report. So just some things to think about when you're working with folks, to remind them that they actually have rights as tenants. All tenants have right to weather and waterproof accommodation. Plumbing should be working, heating and electrical in good working order, freedom from infestations and insects, sufficient trash receptacles, floors, stairways, railings in good repair. That these are your rights, that you should have working deadbolts in the main entrance, working smoke detectors. These are universal tenant rights. as well as there are tenant responsibilities that also come with that. So that does say you actually have to pay your rent on time. You have to keep your unit relatively clean and sanitary, that you only use gas and electrical plumbing properly. You can't, start a glass blowing business off your gas stove, that kind of thing. You can't fix or pay, you pay for or fix repair items that your guests have damaged, and also use the premises and rooms for intended purposes. A lot of people have gotten into some trouble with this, that they are renting maybe a 2-bedroom apartment, but they only use 1 bedroom, so they Airbnb out their 2nd bedroom. Well, that's usually prohibited in most tenant agreements. And so you can actually be evicted for using those premises. Or if you're running a business out of your rented property and that was not allowed in the agreement. So just be aware of, some people have gotten in trouble with running Etsy's through their apartments. So make sure you're reading the fine print there. Do not engage in illegal activities, and limit the household tenant to the number allowable by law or whatever's in the lease agreement. If the lease agreement says only 2 people live there, you can't bring in a 3rd roommate if there's a limit to that in your agreement. So a reminder to remind folks before signing a lease to not put money down unless you're sure you want it. If money down is potentially money lost if you change your mind. Calculate all anticipated costs of the unit, such as gas and electricity and parking, to make sure you're just calculating that in. You usually can call the utility company and ask what the average was for the last 12 months on a unit, so you know what you're dealing with. Maybe you can really afford the rent on the old creaky house, but you don't realize is that you can't afford to heat it or cool it because it's so old and drafty. So just make sure, sort of eyes wide open before taking that on. Review the agreement to make sure the landlord has responsibility to respond to emergencies, including point of contact, and a time frame for response is always helpful. And talk with prospective neighbors about the unit and neighborhood if at all possible, particularly even visiting the property after hours or during weekends. So I'm going to go kind of quickly over this, but I think it's important to know that people have rights, even when it comes to non-payment and eviction, that these are universally required of landlords to follow. So that if they are doing an eviction for non-payment, they are required to give notice. If rent was actually not due, you actually did pay a rent, or you were given some sort of forgiveness, that you should talk to an attorney and have some sort of documentation. And if and when payment is made and you are paying with anything other than a check, that you always want to make sure that you're getting a receipt for that payment of that rent. The next step would be notice from the court. If it's not paid, they can petition for eviction and a summons to appear. Again, still worth asking the landlord if they agree to a payment plan for back rent. It's usually worth it to the landlord to work something out with the current tenants and have to deal with eviction and going through the whole thing, cleaning the whole place. It's usually going to be a couple of months until they can get new tenants in there anyway. So always see if you can work something out. If you don't appear to court, that the judge will usually sign the eviction and warrant for possessions of the unit. And then finally, then the notice from the sheriff, and this is an order to vacate, will likely be enforced by law enforcement, and non-compliance may result in forcible removal and loss of possessions left in the property. So there are such things as a legal eviction. If the landlord does not follow proper legal procedures for eviction, for example, they just change the locks while you're away, or make life so uncomfortable for you that you can't stay there. They cut off utilities or whatever. This is called a constructive eviction, that's not legal. Or they even try to physically remove you from the property. That is actually an illegal conviction and not allowed. They have to follow those steps that were previously outlined. And this can actually have civil and criminal consequences to it. Now we're going to get a little bit now kind of talked about what tenant rights are for renters, but let's also just talk a little bit about home ownership briefly. I'd be curious, how many of you own a home? Or rent? If you guys would feel comfortable sharing if you're a renter or owner, that would be awesome. If you want to share that in the chat, I'd be curious to know. Before buying, consider some things like, do you have steady income, a stable job? Do you plan to stay in a community? Do you budget? Do you stick to a budget? Do you have a good credit history score? And if you are considering it, you want to first then get pre-qualified with a lender. And this will tell you how much the bank is willing to lend you when you go out starting to look at things. So we have some renters renters. We have some owners, it looks like, in the chat. And also look into low and moderate income mortgage programs. There's some really good programs out there. First time buyers, rural housing, direct loan programs also might be helpful to you. I will just tell you, and I'm going to ask Clover here to share her story with her when we wrap up this section in between. I'll just remind you that if you are renting, you are likely already paying somebody's mortgage. It's just not yours. You are paying your landlord's mortgage, more than likely. So just something to think about. So that your landlord is actually building credit. Your landlord is actually building equity. And after 5 or 10 years renting, you will have built up no equity. So just something to think about. If you can all swing purchasing and your credit score supports that, I would encourage you to think about home ownership. I think it does a lot of good for communities and neighborhoods. I think particularly if you're a person of color or a female, you are really challenging status quo in a lot of ways by becoming a homeowner. So something to think about and encourage you to consider. I'll also tell you, interest rates are going up. I think I mentioned this yesterday. The feds have been very clear. Interest rates are going up. We're going to see that. So now is a good time to start really locking in a potentially lower interest rate, getting some of that debt, that higher interest rate debt paid off. Now is a good time to start thinking about that. So a little bit about the mortgage process and what the different types of loans are. Probably what most of us are familiar with are things like a fixed rate mortgage. And the most common and most popular one is a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. That's probably what most of us have if you own a home. This is where the interest rate is fixed. It doesn't change for the lifetime of that loan. And that this is a really good idea, particularly if you plan on staying somewhere for a decent amount of time. Anybody have a fixed rate mortgage, but every year it slightly goes up or slightly goes down, and your payment amount to the bank will slightly adjust every year, even though you have a fixed rate mortgage. Does anybody ever experience that? This is the test. Yeah. So Nubia says, yep, that you've seen that happen. So what's happening is the terms of your loan are not changing, and the amount you're paying towards your loan isn't paying. What is changing is your escrow. So let me explain how this works. So if your home loan payment is $800, but you actually are paying $900 every month to the bank, what you're actually doing is you're paying an extra $100 onto your loan to the bank, and it goes actually into what's called an escrow account. And the bank will hold that $100, and every month another $100 goes into it. Will hold escrow for you against your property. What they do, though, then by holding escrow, then they're responsible for paying your insurance and paying the taxes on that property. So it's not a scheme, it's not a bad thing, it's not a plot or anything like that. The downside is they're holding escrow in an account that will not gain interest for you, which is sort of unfortunate. But the upside is you don't have to worry about if your insurance is paid and your taxes are paid. The reason banks want to hold escrow on your property, on the property that they lend you money for, is that they don't want to have you owe money on a property that's not insured or that back taxes are owed, because that's a higher risk for them. So they are like, we got it. We'll just charge you extra. Well, there's rules around how much money should be in the escrow compared to how much is going out. And that's what slightly adjusts year to year. Maybe your insurance rates went up. Maybe your taxes went down. Maybe specials came off, whatever that is. That may adjust over time. And so that is why you'll see an adjustment annually on your escrow account, not your actual loan. So I hope that makes sense to folks. The other kind of loan you can see out there is called an ARM loan, or adjustable rate mortgage is what that stands for. So an example would be that if you got a 3-year ARM, you will get locked in for the next 3 years at whatever prime is. And then after 3 years, you are allowing then the terms of the loan to adjust to whatever prime is then at the 3-year mark. You're kind of banking on interest rates going down in that time, or you're no longer in the property. So that is what an adjustable rate mortgage means. They usually you're able to get in a slightly lower interest rate in an ARM, but you again are then accepting whatever it adjusts to at the end of those terms. And you're kind of locked in unless you're no longer in the property. Those are good also for if you like military, who are often are not in a location for more than 2 or 3 years, or if you're flipping a property, you're moving into the property to improve it and then resell it, an adjustable rate mortgage can make a lot of sense. The last one I just want to point out to you is subprime loans. Now, we heard a lot about subprime loans when the housing bubble burst and the financial world kind of fell off a cliff. Subprime loans got blamed for much of that, and it was fair because they're not good loans. They are not good for borrowers. They're great for lenders, and they're great for people that are betting on people to lose. Subprime loans, basically what that means is, let's say prime is at 4%. Well, subprime loans allow you to get under prime, start your loan under prime. So if prime is 4%, then they'll say, we're going to give you 2% for the first year. Then the next year is going to go 3%. Next year is going to go 4%, and the next year is going to go 5%. And it keeps going up even above prime. Every year it continues to go up and up and up to make up for the difference of when they were giving you a subprime loan. So this was what we were hearing from people, is that, look, I could afford my loan for the first 2 years, and now I can't afford it anymore because the amount they had to pay every month was going up every year. And so subprime loans look really appealing to folks who are only looking at what I'm paying today and not looking and understanding that it's going to go up over time significantly. And so a lot of people got blamed. A lot of the borrowers got blamed. This was their fault. They made bad loans and bad decisions. But what we really are finding out is that people were targeted for these loans. People that had limited English proficiency were targeted for these loans, low learning, first-time buyers. These loans were targeted to people who didn't know better, and they took advantage of that. So during the Obama administration, they went away with subprime loans. The Obama administration said, these are not good for borrowers, and so we're not going to allow them anymore. They came back in the last administration. So they are back. It's not been addressed yet in the current administration. So we'll see. There has been rumors that subprime loans may likely be coming back. Any questions about that? All right. So before applying for a mortgage, some things that the banks will look at is your employment history. Most lenders will look at least 2 years of consecutive employment within the same industry. They will look at your credit history. Lenders look at a history of on-time payments. You must demonstrate that you can manage credit responsibly, as well as total monthly payments for debts should not exceed 42% of your monthly earnings. And finally, cash and asset reserves. So lenders may request information about your available cash or assets. I also will just point out, and I forgot to mention in the credit history portion, is if you go to apply for a loan, particularly mortgage, they will give you a pre-qualified approval. And that is based on what your credit score and report says at that moment. If you then, in the meantime, go buy a bunch of new furniture and go put a bunch of debt on a credit card, and now your credit score is lower, significantly lower at the time of closing, the bank can withdraw the offer at closing. So you want to make sure that you do not go change your credit score, do anything charging up a bunch of stuff in between making your offer and closing, because that is why banks don't like more than they want at least a 30-day closing period for those things to come back on. So, or that to make sure you don't have a falsely inflated score when they made you the pre-approved offer. So just be careful about that and pay attention to that. Any questions? Oh, hey, Molly, I think I'm going to mute you. There we go. Okay, unless you had a question, if you please unmute yourself, I'd love to hear from you. So that does conclude the end of module 4, which is all about loans. You will also see in what I sent you, the link at the very beginning. We'll send again before we start the next round. If Teresa, if you could put that link back up that I sent the first round, there's a loan calculator in there that you can take a look at. It'll help you calculate what your monthly payment is and what your interest would be based on the terms of the loan. So that can be really helpful to help survivors think through what that might look like. The other thing I wanted to mention, I'm gonna see if I can easily pull it back up here. Bear with me for 1 second. Of course, nothing's gonna be that easy. Give me 1 minute, because I would like to share this with you. Oops, didn't mean to do that at all. Let me see here. Give me 1 second, I promise. Okay. I'm gonna pull up module 3 real quick that we went over a minute ago. And I'm going to Okay, I'm gonna go all the way to the end here. Sorry, going fast, ignore it. I hope you don't make anybody sick here. We're gonna, oh, here we go. I show this at the very end. I forgot I had this slide at the end here. Bear with me. It's gonna be great for review and people watch it. So we talked about bankruptcy. And then at the very end, I wanted to just mention to you that we also have what's called the Independence Project. So this is credit building microloan program that we have at NNEDV. This is a loan that any survivor can apply for. We would prefer that they hear about it from you, but this is a $100 no fee, no interest loan. We know $100 isn't a lot of money, but what the beauty of this loan is that it's actually made to help build credit. So they pay the loan back $10 a month for 10 months. And every month they make their payment, we report it to the 3 credit bureaus. We've seen on average credit scores increase by 25 to 30 points, which is significant. We've seen average score at the end of their loan period on average is about 638 points, which is pretty significant. People can keep coming back and getting more loans as they want until they get a B credit score. So we are currently lending in every state in US territory. The reason we would prefer that they hear about it from you is because if they're not connected, number one, it's actually required they have to have met with the domestic violence advocate at least 3 times. And that's because we've told our funders that these funds are going to help support victims of domestic violence. And that's how we're proving that, is they've worked with you. And so they identify who their domestic violence advocate is on their application. We reach out to the advocate identified and say, hey, are you working with Jane? She said she's met with you at least 3 times, and you say yes. So that's required. And then they also have to then submit, they put in their budget, and their budget has to show there's at least $10 left at the end of every month to show that they can manage the loan, at least on paper. These loans are backed, meaning that if for some reason she can't complete the loan, we actually have a guarantor fund that we pay it off out of. So it will not have a huge negative impact on her. This loan will then be closed and paid by guarantor. So it'll have minimal negative impact on the survivor. If for some reason we had to close a loan for non-payment, they can just take 6 months off and they can come back and try again after 6 months. So we are looking at expanding this. We're actually expanding with another state to do larger loans. We're doing $500 and $1,000 loans at 1% and 2% interest rates. And so we're just trying this out in Minnesota right now. We got some seed money that they got some seed money to try this larger loan program. But this is available. You can access this through our website on the economic justice page. There's a link for application survivors apply on their own, and then they just identify you as their advocate. Are there any questions about this? Oh, it still says, oh my Lord, it still says loan application. Hang on 1 second. I'm sorry. New share. You didn't see any of this, did you? So there we go. This is what it says. I didn't have my chat up. This is the Independence Project. So again, you're welcome to access it and share it with survivors on our website. Okay, so Clover, would you mind sharing your story that you shared with me on the break? Putting you a little on the spot here.
Nope, happy to share. Can you hear me okay? Thumbs up?
Yep.
All right, great. So I guess I'm really impressed by the fact that this is a credit journey, or and that was witnessed by me, who I am an advocate and a social worker and a survivor of abuse. So 20 years ago, I did leave an abusive spouse, and I left the home, and he was able to stay in the home, and he was able to live in that home at the very low mortgage, while I was still trying to find places to stay at market rate. So it wasn't until I went to court twice to compel him to sell, and I was able to do that finally last year, but I still can't get a first-time homeowner loan, which is really valuable if you find the right program. I mean, you get money for closing costs, you get a lower interest rate, but I can't get that because my name stayed on the deed. So it is a journey, because you know, betters will better, you know, they're just going to do what's in their DNA. And so he did continue to do that financially, even though I was away from the home. So it was kind of up to me to figure out what I was going to do. So in the course of 5 years, I have built my credit from what I said to you was in the basement to being almost in the attic. And I am ready to buy now, even though I can't get that home loan. I really have struggled with these things that you were talking about. So I've made some rookie mistakes, but then I did have to, kind of like, okay, where am I going to go? And one of the things that I do now is I pay off everything. So even one of the rookie mistakes that I made 2 years ago was when the pandemic happened. I had allocated $50 per month. Like, this is what I'm going to pay. I had it automatically taken out. So if I forgot, I would just have that $50 taken out of, to pay credit. I didn't realize that what really counted was to pay the minimum. And so when the pandemic happened and I got sick, even though I had that $50 that was allocated to be taken out, the minimum was not paid. And before I knew it, I didn't even realize that I was sick. COVID happened. 2 months had gone by with a late payment, and that really brought my score down. But what I did was I did research credit, and I was like, how can I bring that back up? And they were like, just pay everything off, make sure that you're paying every single thing. And I did, and it brought that score probably within a year, it went up 50 points. And so I think that's it. Like, it is a journey, and I guess that's kind of what I want to say. Thank you.
No, thanks for sharing that. That's amazing. And you're such an inspiration. And I think it's a great example because we're all human, right? The journey is never just a trajectory straight up, right? It's ups and downs and backs and forths and all that stuff. So it's a fantastic example. And also that you then researched it, that you figured it out, and that you're making steps all the time. Every month you go, doing it, paying the way you are is that you make that mistake less weighty in your credit score. So that's an amazing example. So thanks for sharing that. I also want to just point out too that the Independence Project is available for advocates in that we don't ask where you work, as long as somebody else is willing to be identified as your advocate, which I know can put you in a little bit of a strange place. We don't share any information with their advocate that identifies. There's nothing that I should say that prohibits a survivor who is employed at a local program from participating in the Independence Project. We've tried really hard to get our own just set aside set of money for advocates. We've just not had a funder that's willing to just do advocate credit rebuilding, because we think that is also so very important. All right, so we're going to do module 5. This one's going to be even quicker than what we've done so far. Let me get my screen share going here. Maybe hopefully I can get it right this time, so I got it wrong last time. Here we go. So here is module 5. Again, going to be quick, and then we're going to close with talking about different ways you can provide this at the local level. So long-term planning. So saving strategies, investment, and we're going to talk about education and planning for that education or funding that education. So again, this is your last, give me your scale, but how comfortable are you with investing? Do you feel great about it? Do you love it that your happy place is looking at E-Trade and watching CNBC? Yeah, 5 out of 10, 7. Anybody else? How do you feel about investing? Okay. Keep coming in. 3, because I have no idea what I'm doing, but I want to. Hey, wanting to is the first step, Jessica. I appreciate that. 2-ish. Yep, I get it. It's very confusing. Yep, totally. Just I want you to think about what you've been told about investing and things like, how much do you think you'll need to retire comfortably? I know I've been asked that. I think that has got to be one of these stupidest questions, because I'm like, well, how much do I think I need? It kind of depends on how much until I die, right? I want just enough until the day I die, and I don't know when that's going to be, but ideally that would be awesome. Do you think you're going to have enough for retirement? So here's the first thing I do want to just tell you is that, so here's what I'm going to ask this to the group, and I would really love your participation. If you are over the age of 40 and listening, how many of you who are over the age of 40 wish you had started working and building on your retirement earlier? If you're over 40, do you wish you had started working on your retirement and building your retirement earlier? And I'll be the first to admit at 50, 100% yes. Yes, 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 yes. Right? So lots of yeses here. Guessing most people are in the similar boat. So I guess then what I'm going to tell you, no, you had fun in your 20s and 30s, but do you wish you'd maybe had fun and put a little bit in retirement? And good for you, Sam. I think maybe we would have been in the same place then. I don't regret my 20s and 30s. I do wish I could have put a little different aside. I think I could have had fun and put some money aside. Yeah, I get it. So here's and the reason I ask this and point this out is that for those of you who are in your 20s and 30s, I guess I'm asking you to not make the mistakes that we made, or to do things a little differently. Now's a time that you can invest and have to invest less on a regular basis than those of us who are sort of playing catch up in our 40s, 50s, and 60s. So please just take that with whatever it's worth. And now's a chance for you who are younger to take advantage of some of these things. So, and the thing about investing is really earning interest on your money. So while interest may seem boring, it's really important to take advantage of it. And here's some explaining why. So if you have a 20-year-old who makes a one-time retirement contribution of $5,000, grandparents gave it to her when she graduated or something, $5,000. She invested one time, 8% annual return, which is not uncommon. On average, to have 8% annual return, it would grow to be $160,000 when that person turns 65. Not bad. $5,000, put it away, didn't touch it, didn't add to it. It would grow to be $160,000. Nice investment. Versus you have a 39-year-old that makes a one-time retirement contribution, got the stimulus money or whatever it was, a one-time contribution at 8% return, grows to be about $40,000 when they retire. So, a fourth less. I'm not good at math, but I know that's a fourth less. Or 3/4 less, it's 1/4 of what the 160 is, right? I'll get there. Versus you have a 20-year-old female or a 20-year-old that makes an annual contribution of $5,000 a year, 8% interest, retires at 35. So every year making a $5,000 investment would be $1.93 million. That is significant, right? So what a difference making regular contribution makes. So for many of us, I know that feels like a lot of money, but for many of us, that would actually only be about $200 a paycheck. And I know that's a lot. I still know that $200 is a lot of money. But could you do half of that? Could you find $100 a paycheck or $50 a paycheck? But look how much difference that makes to put money away, to put it away consistently and leave it alone. You're talking a significant amount of money there. So just something to think about is, making that a habit. My daughter started her first job at Target when she turned 16. When she turned 18, she was eligible for investment. We got her invested right away. Now she only ended up working a couple more months before she went to college. And it wasn't a ton of money, but what she learned was when you're offered this from your employer, you take advantage of it. So the next time that happens, she'll know to do the same thing. So compound interest, for many of us, again, $5,000 seems impossible, and that's okay. Start with an amount that works for you and your budget. Consider a percentage of your income. Again, we talked about this yesterday. That way, when your income increases, so does your contribution. So if you make $25,000 a year, can you do 2%, $500 a year, $40 a month, $20 a paycheck? Most of us can find $20 a paycheck that we could probably pull from somewhere and put it into retirement. Compound interest, make that work for you. So this is an example of just by saving $40 a month at 8% growth, you would come out to, after 20 years, $23,000, over $23,000 after 20 years. And of that, $13,000 is just growth on the money itself. Only a little less than 10,000 of it is actually your contribution. So it's significant when you put money away to leave it alone. So some things to consider. Again, start early, start now. The younger and sooner you start, the more time works in your favor. Again, if you didn't though start early, there are still some options. There are actually some federal regulations that allow older workers to put more money into retirement plans that have some tax advantages to help you do some catching up. Make regular investments, remain disciplined, make saving for your retirement a priority. You are worth it. right? You work hard. You deserve a retirement. So I think of it that way, if nothing else, that you are worth a retirement. I'm telling you, I've been doing this since I was 19. I'm 50. I'm tired. My street cred is waning. And so, yeah, I want to retire and I deserve it. I've worked hard. I've contributed to my community and my society. And I'm ready when I turn 62 to not work. And so I'm working really hard to make that happen. And part of it too is we got to leave room for the next set of advocates, right? That I shouldn't be 75 and working at a shelter. I'm not going to be at my best. And I need to make way for somebody who, is coming up, hopefully. So, but part of that means that I need to start really investing in my retirement to make that happen. So be patient. Do not touch the funds. Allow your investments to grow. The only time you would ever really want to tap into literally cash out of retirement is if you're facing like homelessness, if there's no other way out. And even, if something happened to me, I would sell this house to get something smaller first before I would get, cash in a retirement to keep the house. I need to first try to reduce that first. So some some investment options, and we're not going to get too much into this, but just give you some information on language that may be familiar. So there's IRAs, these are individual retirement accounts, there's tax advantages, you can set them up yourself, or employers can set them up. But really the thing to keep in mind and to understand is there's a difference between Roth and traditional IRAs. So an example of a traditional IRA is I have $20 today. I want to invest in my traditional IRA. I invest it. It goes to be $1 million. I pull off of, $40,000 in retirement to live off every year. And I'm going to pay taxes now as though I have income range of $40,000. That's the tax bracket in which I'm going to pay taxes is the $40,000 income tax bracket. Right? Versus my Roth IRA. If I have $20, I want to invest in my Roth IRA. They'll pay taxes on it today based on my current income tax bracket. So now I'm actually going to only invest $18 because I had to pay $2 to taxes. It's going to grow to be $1 million. And when I pull $40,000 off of it every year to live off of, I pay no taxes on it. It is tax-free because I paid on my money when I invested it. So that's kind of the difference between a traditional Roth. In general, Roth IRAs are always the best advantage. The only time they wouldn't be is if you are really nearing retirement, because you're not going to be able to take advantage of that part. But in general, Roth IRAs tend to be the best for folks. They are actually passed by Congress and approved by Congress as a way to help middle and low incomes increase their retirement savings. Pensions, now these are amazing because they're set up by employers and they have guaranteed payouts and benefits. Meaning that when you retire, you know exactly how much you're going to get. You're going to get 80% of your salary or 75% of your salary, whatever that is, guaranteed salary, guaranteed pay, as well as for many of them also comes with guaranteed benefits like insurance. These are amazing because they're guaranteed and you know exactly what it is. It's not based on the market. You're going to get whatever your income was or a percentage of that. But they're expensive. That's why they're harder to come by and why most places don't offer them anymore. The places that do offer them are federal government, or military still has pensions. Some state and local governments still offer pensions. Union workers will often still have pensions, and that's part of their negotiations. But the reason they've gone away is because they're very expensive to maintain. We're living longer than we were 20, 40, 60 years ago when pensions became a thing. We're now really also very expensive to keep alive. So pensions are actually crippling and bankrupting many communities. The city of Detroit went bankrupt because of the pension plan. So if you are partnered with somebody who has a pension, be nice to them because they're hard to come by and they're pretty great. If you know someone who's single who has a pension, let me know because I'm available. But they're pretty great. So keep that in mind. But most of us have a 401k, a 403b, that sort of the system where you put in, they put in, and you decide how it's invested. You decide if you want high risk, low risk, medium risk, all that, but you take the risk on and that you then you manage that. They have deferred taxes on these when withdraw, and most of these are employer sponsored. I'll just tell you though, if your company or your organization where you work offers any sort of match, take full advantage of that. Some places offer 2% and 3%. So if you're putting in, $1,000 $1,000 a year, they're going to put in $1,000 a year. So now you're putting away $2,000, but you have to put your investment in first for them to put their investment in. Don't leave money on the table, as they say. If you're a company or your organization offers a match for retirement, take full advantage of it. Additionally, whatever money you're investing will then drop your tax bracket. So maybe you're investing enough that you have now come to a lower tax bracket because the money that you invest is tax-free. So something to keep in mind. You can actually find that you're investing $1,000, but you actually are only going to reduce your income by $800 because you're in a lower tax bracket now. So that may be a real advantage. So something to keep in mind. Calculating again your retirement goals. Typically, they said that you should be able to live on about 70% of your pre-retirement income. So, for example, if you made $50,000 before you retired, you should be able to live on about $35,000 a year. So some different types of investment vehicles. There's savings bonds. These are government issued. Typically, they double in value maturity, and they anywhere from increments of $50,000 to $10,000. This interest does accumulate tax-free, and it pays half its value and typically doubles, like I said earlier. Mutual funds. These are a collection of stocks. So you kind of think of mutual funds as like you have an accordion file, and you have little, each piece of paper represents a little bit of a stock of a company. So if you mutual funds, it's full of, a little bit of Best Buy, a little bit of, pharma, a little bit of this is in your mutual fund. So it's a collection of stocks from private companies in a single investment. Where stocks are actually directly buy a piece of that stock. So maybe you want to go buy Apple stock, and you would go on E-Trade and buy Apple stock, and you actually own that, versus the mutual fund that has a collection of a whole bunch of different things in it. And then bonds are loans to companies or even communities. So I don't know if you've ever noticed when it's voting time, sometimes they will do, your school will do a bond issue, and you get to approve whether or not the school takes out a bond to do an improvement. You can actually buy then that bond. You can actually be the lender for that. They're very safe. Your loans are guaranteed. They will be repaid at a specific interest, and they're very, very safe. They just, you don't get as much interest rate. So when you'd want to invest in bonds versus something more risky like stocks is when you're closer to retirement, because the risks are higher with those stocks or mutual funds. And then property. I think oftentimes we forget that our property is actually a form of investment. Again, most property will actually appreciate over time. So purchasing home, land, things like that is considered an investment vehicle. So and I just want to remind you that it's always a good idea to think about estate planning. I think in general, we kind of think, oh, estate planning is for people who have like things like estates, but don't let the terminology trip you up. You need to have a will. If you have things and people you care about where they go, you're going to die. When you die, you need to have a will. I can, from personal experience, my ex-husband died suddenly 2 years ago. We did not see that coming. He did not see that coming. And he died without a will. And it cost my kids the little bit that he had, $4,000 of it had to get paid to an attorney just to prove to the courts that my kids were the rightful heirs of those funds. And there was no other people coming after it. They were it. So had we had to fight it, it would have been even more so. So establishing a will would have saved what little he did have for the kids. They would have gotten it all, but instead we had to pay an attorney fee for that. So establish a will. You can usually do this sort of really, $150, $200 flat rate to most attorneys. So really make sure you got a will. Purchase life insurance, as well as considering power of attorney, which clearly states your wishes regarding your healthcare, property, all that good stuff should also be in there. Some community programs that may be helpful to you are things like match savings programs. These are accounts that are matched for every dollar you save. It's matched with either public or private dollar. There used to be what we called IDA programs. These actually went away in the last administration. Hopefully they'll come back, but these really helped people save dollar for dollar up to $2,000 for things like home purchasing, micro enterprise development, and education. So hopefully they'll come back. And then there's also micro enterprise development programs. So reach out if you have a small business idea, particularly if you're a minority, reach out to your small business association to see if they might have some investment or capital to help you work towards those dreams and goals. And then finally, there, make sure you're taking full advantage of federal and state earned income tax credits. Most of us probably who have kiddos still in the home got an extra little drop on the 15th of every month since July, which was really helpful and handy. That stopped. It ended in December. Hopefully we'll see that come back. I don't know. It was a nice little gift. But basically it was prepaying what we'll get when we normally would file. So those we got, they were called an advanced child tax credit versus what you would get when you would then file in January, February, I guess. All right, and then finally, or not finally, we're almost done, but insurance overview, just making sure that your insurance is up to date, making sure people are taking care of your insurance and what you have is working. Don't forget that we still have the Affordable Care Act is actually what it's called. It's not named after anybody. It's actually just called the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act requires things like well woman visits, contraceptions, mammograms, breastfeeding supplies, HIV screenings are all covered. We have an entire generation of young women who have never paid for contraception. When I was younger and needing those things, those were expensive. I had a budget for that. And it was really a challenge. And I'll tell you too, that we have seen unplanned pregnancies drop by over half in most states since the ACA that required that contraception be paid for, be covered. And so it's having a significant impact on unwanted pregnancies. So it really is being beneficial to women. Another thing to consider is a health savings account, which allows you to pay some out-of-pocket expenses. So your health savings account often happens. You can do one individually on your own, but a lot of employers offer them too, that an extra little chunk of money comes out of your paycheck every month, goes into this health savings account, and then you make payments off that account for things like co-pays on medicine or prescriptions, or you need a leg brace and you can use your health savings account tax-free to pay for those things. Again, reducing your overall tax debt or tax bracket. Other types of insurance to keep in mind, make sure your auto insurance is up to date. For those of you who are working with survivors, if she has a car with her, make sure you ask her when her car insurance renewal is due and who pays it. If he normally pays the car insurance and he stops paying on it, she may not realize she's now driving a car that's uninsured. So something to keep in mind. Homeowners and renters insurance. For those of you who are renters, make sure you're getting renters insurance. It's really pretty reasonable, usually about $120, $150 a year. It can easily be tacked on to your current car insurance, but it really helps cover, it does help cover the contents of your apartment. You know, your landlord's insurance covers the walls and the floors, but does not cover your contents. So if there was a fire or a burglary, your landlord's not on the hook for any of your stuff. So renters insurance is a really good thing to consider, and also something to talk to our survivors who are moving out, to adding that to what they're doing, as well as life insurance. So there's whole and there's term. Term is you only get this payout when you die, versus whole is a combination of investments as well as term, and it will actually build cash over time. I'm not going to tell you which one is best or right. I think that is an individual choice. I encourage you to do your own research. In my experience, you can ask 10 people this question to get 10 different answers. So do the research, decide what's best for you. Likely a combination of both is probably pretty good idea, but please do consider that. And then disability insurance. And this is really for folks, particularly those who use their bodies for their job, hairdresser, CNAs, those kinds of folks. If they can't work, particularly if they're self-employed, this short-term disability insurance is actually pretty reasonable in costs for premiums. So consider disability insurance so that if you can't work, you still have some income coming in. All right, so now finally, we're getting to the end here. Educational opportunities. So there's lots of different ways to get a post-secondary education, GEDs, on-the-job training. But I just want to point out that community colleges and trade and vocational schools have really upped their game. If you do a cost analysis, I don't know if you can find a better deal for your money. I say that funding my daughter's 4-year traditional college education, but she's a theater major, which is hard to find in a trade school. But there's a lot of things that people can do, really cool stuff, really good paying jobs coming out of trade and voc schools, as well as community college, to even get prerequisites out of the way, even if your intention is to graduate from a four-year college. So don't overlook that. Create partnerships with these folks too, but these can be really good bang for your buck, taking advantage of that. So if you are looking at a post-secondary education or financing it, everybody who goes into it has to fill out what they call a FAFSA form, which is the free application for federal student aid. Everyone, no matter if you're, you're on public assistance or you're a millionaire, has to fill out a FAFSA. And this is to determine eligibility for student loans and things like that. But this is where you will go to also find out if you got Pell Grants, and then also scholarships, or something everybody should look into. I will tell you the bottom one here, this Women's Independence Scholarship Program, WISP, is a scholarship that is specifically for survivors of domestic violence and their children. And you can go to wispinc.org to apply for that. And this is real. I know people who have gotten it. I know one person that got it in an undergraduate, and they got another round of it in her master's degree. So wispinc.org is a fantastic scholarship for survivors. It actually was started by Warren Buffett's sister. Started this. It used to be called the Sunshine Lady Foundation. So that's something to think about. Just a little bit more on student loans. So there's two different kinds of student loans people are offered, and I went through this last year with my daughter. It was that we were offered both private and federal loans. You don't want to do private loans if you can at all avoid it. They're risky, and they're typically more expensive than federal loans. And also, if there's ever any sort of charge off allowed, like there's a federal repayment program, private loans will never be a part of that. So do not take out private loans if you can at all avoid it. Federal student loans also don't require any credit check or cosigner, and does not require repayment until the student has left school or dropped below half-time status. And it also offers more flexible repayment plans and options, and will be more regulated than a private student loan. So these are some of the federal loan programs to pay attention to. There's direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans. There's direct plus loans, consolidation loans, Stafford and Perkins loans are the different types of federal loans. Ways to think about saving for your education or saving for a kid's education. There's 529 college plans. There's prepaid tuition plans that allow for tax-free expenses, or when you pull that out. So I encourage you to take advantage of that. There's some other available credits when you go to file. A lot of information in here. We won't go through it all, but we have now officially made it to the end of module 5. Again, you can probably see why that might be a really good module to bring in somebody from the outside to help you present, maybe a financial planner, somebody from your bank, or even somebody from the college student loan center might be fun to bring in for that section. So any questions so far? You guys have been amazing. I can't imagine what this has been like for the last 2 days to be on the other side of this. So I appreciate your attentiveness. I just want to talk a little bit about now what, right? Now what do you do is thinking about how you want to set this program up. What we have learned is that this is not for everybody. This should not be handed over to everybody that comes into shelter. Right? That there's a small group of folks that are sort of beyond crisis that you've been working with for a while. They're ready to take these steps. That this would be a really nice closed support group setting. And so that's something that I would encourage you to think about. Maybe something you offer 2 or 3 times a year, that you offer it for 5 weeks in a row, that you figure out how to provide childcare, you feed them, you try to give them vouchers if you can for transportation, or gift certificates for attendance and incentives. But these are the things I would encourage you to think about. Most of these will last about an hour, hour and a half in time when you go through it with survivors, and to maybe do a module a week. And that provide time to have feedback and all that good stuff. We have found that typically closed groups work best, because you kind of work, I think you probably noticed how we built on information we got from a previous module. And so it's helpful. I think also your participants will have some trust with one another, and that if you allow somebody to enter in week 3 for the first time, that there's some establishment of trust among the participants can be hard to recreate. So just something to be thinking about is how you use this. But I think, and then what time of day you offer it. We have had some people do all, 3 or 4 hours on a Saturday for 2 rounds, but mostly we're hearing evenings tends to work best. And then if you can provide it around a meal, that can be really, really helpful too. And you could do it even as a potluck, everybody brings something to share potentially. But those are available to you. You can order from the website that we shared, the actual hard copies for survivors to use. You know where to find the PowerPoints. Those are available to you. Any questions?